Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Reality Check. Our age is dominated by the ephemeral and the transient. Cultural deconstruction runs rampant, and the looming nihilism seems to engulf all meaning and existence itself. Yet, the transcendent still manages to break through. Here at Reality Check, we inquire how to conserve the real in a time of deconstruction. What is the role of beauty and imitation in shaping our moral lives? In an age where art is often seen as a mere self-expression or even morally neutral, we're confronted with a profound dilemma. Can art still function as a mirror to our highest ideals, even a guide to virtue and a vessel for truth? Or has the modern connection from the classical understanding of art, that is the imitation of life and moral action, led us astray? Joining us to explore this question and many more is Dr. Daniel McInerny, a philosopher and author whose work reactivates the ancient but ever-relevant view that beauty and imitation are not just aesthetic pursuits, but essential to our moral and spiritual well-being. Dr. Daniel McInerny is Associate Professor and Chair of the Philosophy Department at Christendom College in Front Royal, Virginia. He's also a novelist and a dramatist. As a scholar, Daniel is foremost interested in reactivating an Aristotelian understanding of mimetic art. And in 2024, he, for Word on Fire Academic, published a monograph called The Way of Beauty. Beauty and Imitation. Got your title wrong there. Beauty and Imitation for Word on Fire. So welcome, Dr. McInerny. Welcome, Daniel.
Jan, it's a great pleasure to be with you here today. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Of course, it was a no-brainer since we used to be colleagues at Christendom College. So how could I not invite you? I saw you had a lecture for the Catholic Art Institute, I believe it was, and so that brought my attention to your newest publication. So I'm very happy we can talk about
Wonderful.
This. So kind of first things first, but how did you get into philosophy? And more specifically, how did you get involved and interested in this question of art and beauty and imitation and how virtue is connected?
Yeah. Wow. That's a lot. That's my life story you're asking for.
Maybe you can give us the Cliff Notes version.
Yeah, Cliff Notes version is this. I think of myself as an artist before I think of myself as a philosopher. I think anybody who knew me as a child would have known me as the kid who was always drawing. And that, I think, is really the deepest desire of my heart is to make art. And in my adult life, I am a writer. I'm a novelist, as you said, a dramatist. That has always come first. I encountered philosophy, first of all, at home. My father, my late father, Ralph McInerny, was a renowned philosopher, taught at the University of Notre Dame in Indiana for over 50 years, a great Thomist philosopher. And so I was very familiar with the academic life of a philosopher just from inside my house. It was during my undergraduate years that it was actually in a course on the philosophy of art where I began to think seriously about graduate school and the life as an academic philosopher for myself. And one of the things that attracted me about it was that I wouldn't have to give up my artistic interests. It's that what surprised me about philosophy is that it could go anywhere and do anything. And that was exciting to me. And so lo and behold, all these years later, I am teaching philosophy as an academic, but I teach a course myself in the philosophy of art and beauty. I teach a course in the philosophy of culture, on poetic experience and truth. So my work is still in that area. And then I'm a working artist as well. So those two, that's my life, is having both of those things a part of it, always operating at the same time.
Very good. So that gives me some hope for my sons that, Thomistic conversations at the dinner table will not completely mess you up.
Yes, that's right. So my father was disciplined. We actually did, unlike some families, we actually did not have the deep philosophical conversations at the dinner table. I think my father knew when to throttle back.
Very good. See, there's a very well-formed man right there. So I got really intrigued by the premise of your book. And I got intrigued specifically because when we look at modern art and we have discussions and inside the classroom and outside with artists and philosophers, what seems to me the case is that the prime mantra of modern art is originality. You have to be creative. You have to be original. You have to do something new. You have to be avant-garde. And when then I hear imitation in relation to beauty, I ask myself, well, imitation is just copying something else. So that is quite literally the opposite of being original, at least so it seems. So how would you answer this? Why is originality and creativity the most important element of art?
Yes. Again, a complicated question. I think it's best to begin by talking more precisely about what imitation is, because you are exactly right. I think when we hear that word, we think, oh, copying, that seems sort of stale. I'm just imitating. I'm just trying to give the most faithful rendering of whatever I'm focused on as I can. That doesn't seem exciting. It doesn't seem original. So let's talk more about what imitation is. And I take an idea here from a great philosopher and teacher of mine, Monsignor Robert Sokolowski, who teaches in the philosophy department at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. Sokolowski has this notion of picturing. And when I reflected upon it, I realized, yeah, imitation is a kind of picturing. So what do we mean by picturing? When we picture, we are trying to bring the reality of something in its real presence into a new medium. So I'll say that again. We're trying to bring the real presence of something into a new medium. So if we're talking about a sensible object, so let's say I have a bowl of fruit and a bottle of wine on a table. What the painter of the still life is trying to do is he's trying to bring the sensible reality of the bowl of fruit and the wine, but also its intelligible reality into a new medium, onto a canvas in the medium of oil paint, say. That is not just copying. Yes, the still life painter can render it faithfully, but if it's an artist like Paul Cézanne, the rendering might not be aiming at, photorealism. Yeah. He might be playing with the rules of perspective, say, as Cézanne does. The point is to bring the reality of the thing, right? Not merely in the sense of its of literal faithfulness, but it's intelligible reality and it's sensible reality. In order to do that, we have to freshen the representation that we're doing. And that is where a genuine sense of originality and creativity, the artist's own expressiveness, does come into play. I don't think a memetic view, as I would call it, dismisses those things, but it is primarily focused on bringing the sensible and intelligible reality of something in the material world into our real presence so we can contemplate it afresh. That's the real punchline with any work of art, not just painting. We want to contemplate the world in its freshness again. We want to see it with new eyes. That's why we bring it into a new medium: oil paint, tones in music, language and literature, what have you.
And that's fascinating. What strikes me in that is that there seems to be two elements. Number one is, in order to bring a reality into a new medium, one has to be discerning. And one has to even, choose different elements to depict, choose other elements not to depict, by kind of force of, how we perceive, for example, three-dimensional objects. We'll never be able to depict it fully. Maybe a sculptor actually would. Okay, so I caught myself there. But either case, we have to pick and choose. So that's one element that I want to kind of dive into for a moment. And then another element is that the imitation that you speak about seems to happen on multiple levels, though, because, and I'm just kind of throwing this out there, what you think about it, because if, let's say, a playwright writes a drama that is to be performed on stage, and he effectively tries to capture something from reality that is different personas that he may have encountered or that may have invented, and usually it's a mixture of both. Then you have the artist who's on stage, the actor who needs to interpret the text, but then you also have the audience who listens, and not everybody hears the same thing. We know this very well from the classroom, right? You say the same thing, but not everybody gets the same thing. And sometimes that's actually a good thing. Sometimes it's detrimental, but sometimes it's actually a good thing because the student picks and chooses on their own making. So how would you comment these two things, the discernment and then also the different levels of imitation?
Yes. I mean, you described it beautifully at the beginning. You were describing what you call the artist's discernment or discrimination, or simply the artist is constantly making choices. And those choices, again, are trying to bring both a sensible reality and an intelligible reality into a new medium. Mm-hmm. But again, to do that in a fresh way, to do that in a way that an audience can appreciate is gonna involve decisions that take us pretty far away from how that reality exists in the real world. So, for example, human action doesn't typically occur in perfect, 90-minute or 120-minute segments. So the playwright, the screenwriter, the filmmaker is putting a very artificial limitation on the imitation of human action. Why? Because it's easier to contemplate. It's more concentrated. It's more intense. We can perceive the intelligibility and the sensible reality of human actions just much, much, much more easily in the theater than if we were sitting there for untold hours watching human action unfold as it does in real life. So that kind of discrimination is what art is. In different arts, as you notice, they're actually collections of different arts. So in a dramatic piece, you have the art of the playwright and you have the art of the actor. Those are two very, very different arts. And we could probably add many more. There's the art of the director, there's the art of the scene designer, etc. They all are attempting to picture the human reality. And I'm glad we've moved away from painting, because when we talk about art as a kind of picturing, of course, our minds go to painting and drawing. But what I'm suggesting is that all of what we typically call the fine arts, I prefer to call them mimetic arts, all of them are kinds of picturing. So a drama is a kind of picturing. A film is a kind of picturing. And film involves even more arts, I think, than the drama. You have the cinematographer's art, again, the director's art, the screenwriter's art, the actor's art, the scene designer's art, and the makeup artist's art, and on and on and on we go. It's an ensemble piece. But again, they're all trying to picture the reality in a narrative of human action. And then when they're all done, yes, the audience is there taking in the picturing. They're going to bring their own experience, their own richness, their own limitations, and they're going to do their best to interpret and to contemplate. But it's the reality of human action that's the focus of the whole collection of enterprises.
You took it in a direction that I'm really intrigued by, and I've been thinking about this quite a lot, and have just been experiencing it. I'm just an avid fan of movies, and what I've realized is that in most recent times, and most recent times, really, the screenwriting has really slacked quite a bit, and had the quality of it, even of the characters, has deteriorated quite a bit. And I'm posing a question to you then. Do you think that the just entertainment industry, if we can generalize it in those terms, is oversaturated? Because it seems to me that many of the Netflix, for example, productions, or any kind of multi-installment production that has episodes and seasons and so forth, is actually much closer to just the normal daily life. And the characters that are acting within are actually precisely doing that. They're just behaving like the screenwriter thinks an average human being behaves. But ultimately, there's then no more discernment necessary. So there's not, maybe yeah. So I don't know, but would you say that this is an issue specifically for movies and for series? Have you encountered the same thing?
Yes. In fact, my wife and I are constantly on the lookout for typically a good mystery series or a good drama. And they're really hard to find. We found that on Netflix and other streaming platforms. It's just, the quality of the writing is usually not that good. Like you, I have a great love for popular entertainment. In fact, there's a chapter in my book that I call it What's Entertainment, with a question mark, trying to really develop a philosophy of entertainment, because it can be a rich part of our life. It doesn't have to be frivolous and superficial. It can be a rich part of our life. And I think the best works of art throughout history, I'm thinking of Homer and Shakespeare and Jane Austen, you have artists there who knew how to speak to the popular imagination, but created works of just tremendous depth at the same time. And I am fascinated by art that can hit that sweet spot. Hugely popular over time, but just of great, great depth.
How did they manage to do that? How did they manage to create something that, in a sense, transcends their own time?
Yeah. I think if we're talking about storytelling, and all the examples that I just brought up were storytellers, I think you plug into archetypes. There are archetypal narratives that resonate with human beings across time. So the tragedy being one, whether it's an ancient Greek tragedy or Shakespearean tragedy, that's just part of the human experience, that things can go awfully wrong, and apparently, at least, unredeemably wrong, and lives seem to be ruined. People experience that. That's one feature of the human predicament. Another one, if you take Jane Austen, is simply the romantic drama. Falling in love, difficulties in falling in love, meeting the person you're going to commit your life to. That's archetypal in the human experience. So I think the greatest writers tap into the archetype, but they do so in a way that speaks to their own times, right? So Jane Austen's setting, her character, are very, late 18th, early 19th century English pseudo-gentry countryside society. It's very particular. Yet because she is tapping into the archetype, we can't get enough of it in 2024. And you could say the same thing about something similar, at least, about Shakespeare and Homer and Dante and Goethe. We could go on.
Right. Okay, very good. So there's an interplay then of what is timeless, what is archetypical, and how to make it palatable in a certain way, or make it relevant to the time of the writer in this case, or the storyteller. the archetypical timeless and the timeliness, and make it relevant for the audience. So that's really interesting. Now, all right. So you mentioned that this mimesis, this imitation, that specifically Aristotle, in a nutshell, maybe already, or Plato had, is an imitation of essential truths. Maybe even good art then is defined by being able to select and to deepen these archetypical forms that you've mentioned. But I'm going to pose you a difficult question here. How is it then that art is and can and remains to be different? Because if there's only, let's say, 5 archetypes or 10 archetypes, then isn't it true that all art will effectively just be a repetition of those 5 or 10 archetypes?
Right. Well, maybe we should, if we're going to stick in the world of stories and not talk about all of mimetic art in general, there are some big, broad narrative archetypes like tragedy and comedy. But within those super genres, as I like to call them, there's going to be all manner of archetypes. I wouldn't stop at 5. I've never counted them. It's probably not something that can be counted. But the forms of human narrative are widely various. It is just interesting, though. It's still fairly limited set, and we don't get tired of it. Mm-hmm. People don't get tired of rereading Jane Austen or seeing a Shakespearean play. We know the ending. With certain film adaptations, we may know all the dialogue. It's not about that. It gets back, actually, I think, to a theme I mentioned earlier. It's our delight. I want to underscore that word, delight, in contemplation. So that is why I watched that 6-part BBC adaptation of Pride and Prejudice one more time. I know how it ends. I know the dialogue better than the actors did at this point. But I am happy to sit in the dark and delight in that human reality. And I think the same point can be made sort of writ large across the narrative arts and all mimetic art. Our just delight is inexhaustible. What's also inexhaustible is the inventiveness in the artist when it comes to just making it new. Yes, there's an archetype that the writer, for example, is working with, but that's just the beginning. That's just the beginning. Again, the particular setting and characters that a writer might choose might be very particular to that author's age, and that freshens the view, and that gives us new impetus for delight and for contemplation. There's really no end to it. One thing that might help with this, when it comes to picturing, I've been emphasizing so far that our emphasis is always on the reality being pictured, and that is true. But I never want to say that the picture itself, that is the composition that the artist makes with all of its inventiveness, with all of its discernment, as you put it, discrimination, choices, all of that is valuable for its own sake. And there is so much, creativity that goes into that. And there are simply endless ways in which we can freshen our take on the real.
Yeah, it's beautiful. One thing that speaks to this insatiable want is and desire, insatiable desire. That's what I want to say. Is just how much people consume entertainment. I mean, that is really, I think that speaks to this, and that's also where the danger lies in a certain way, because no matter what you put in it, they will consume it, and very few are discerning in the choice of what they'll watch. And we don't need to go to extremes like horror films or something like that. But even in their daily kind of consumption, they don't really realize, and they maybe even lose the capacity to discern between a good story and a bad story, and a good storytelling and bad storytelling. And I mean, for me, that it's most evident in the kind of the remakes and the unending remakes of already existing, what they call now franchises, which in the 80s were just individual movies that, were successful and got the second part or got a second installment or third installment and became a trilogy or whatever. And so it's very interesting, though, that what you say, so the imitation actually happens also within art, right? So that there is an original reality. Let's say it's, Ridley Scott's idea of Blade Runner, which is actually based on a book. So it would actually be Philip K. Dick's book. Then you have the characters that are quite really reimagined by Ridley Scott, turned into Blade Runner in the film. And then there is a remake of it. But the remake is actually kind of, actually it's a sequel, but the sequel is kind of a remake and kind of a sequel, but using previous artistic expressions. And I feel that there's, I don't know, maybe this is just my very limited perspective, but I feel that there is little new storytelling, and this may also have something to do with the production process, that studios are not willing to risk anything. They say, okay, well, it sold well in the past, it will sell again in the future. But there's very little original storytelling, but there's lots of redoing the same thing over and over again. So a remake of Harry Potter, a remake of Lord of the Rings. Like, why don't you just tell a new story, right? So it's fascinating how the imitation always happens.
Yes, and I agree with you 1,000%. We're really in a decadent time, I think, for popular entertainment. Not that there are no good television shows or films, but I think we can agree it's a pretty decadent time. Technology has something to do with this, because the fact now that we can stream at home and we can consume, as we like to say, popular entertainment in such enormous quantities puts pressure on production companies to create more and more and more of it. And now it comes in these bites where we have seasons and episodes within seasons. Each episode has to have a cliffhanger. The season has to have a cliffhanger. They got to keep us from getting on our phones. They got to keep us from switching to another show or another streaming platform. So it all gets diluted, if that's the best metaphor. It all gets pretty thin and flimsy and unoriginal, as you're noticing. In my chapter in my book on popular entertainment, I juxtapose two very different authors. One was the British philosopher and novelist Irish Murdoch, originally born in Ireland. I might be getting that wrong, but anyway, taught and worked in England for the bulk of her career, and then G.K. Chesterton, right, the British essayist and writer and everything else. Irish Murdoch has some harsh things to say about popular art or popular entertainment. She cautions us against the kind of art that is trying to work a kind of magic on us, or put us to sleep, or put us in a daydream state. And a lot of popular entertainment is really trying to do that. It's not trying to challenge us. It's not trying to surprise us. It's really not trying very hard to give us anything fresh to contemplate. That's one take. But then Chesterton comes along in a marvelous little essay. He's focusing on the theater, but I think I apply it to all popular entertainment. Chesterton says the theater should be a treat. That is, a work of popular entertainment should excite us. It should be big. We should have to stand in line for a ticket. It should be drawing big crowds. What I try to do in my chapter is bring both Murdoch's thought and Chesterton's thought together, again, in order to hit that sweet spot. An art that is truly popular, that is going to be exciting and wonderful, delightful, but also takes us into the depths of the human experience, indeed challenges us to see that experience anew.
Very true. And in fact, I would even challenge the audience to think about what movies that they may have seen in theaters actually left the longest lasting impression. And sometimes the external, so the, as you say, waiting in line, or the anticipation of having something that has not been seen or even known before. Like I would say maybe the first Lord of the Rings film, the Fellowship, was a little bit like that, and was really groundbreaking. And for the older generation, even, you know, something like Alien or something like Terminator. But it contributes to the experience. And in fact, I mean, in a certain way, that actually is also an argument for seeing art in the original in general, because going into the Sistine Chapel or looking at the Mona Lisa, which actually is very small when you see it in original and not just always on a screen or in some form of reproduction, it adds to the experience of that work of art, right? There is something to it, that we really are present in the Sistine Chapel with our five senses, and maybe we're annoyed at the guards, or maybe it's very hot, or maybe it smells very, you know, bad because the guy next to us didn't take a shower in the morning in 35 degrees centigrade Roman heat, but it all adds to this experience and engulfment by the situation, right? So
yes. I love that.
So I want to go back to the main trajectory of your argument, though, and I want to again pose you a challenging question. So you said that the audience ought to be challenged by the art, and so we talked about storytelling. This is also true in a certain way. With all of the arts, I would say. Some of them are more accessible. There'll be movies. Some of them are maybe less accessible. This may be a very complicated piece, like a symphony, or a very complicated piece of music. But even some statues, you really need to dedicate, or even some works of art, you need to dedicate, like paintings, you need to dedicate time to in order to appreciate it to the fullest. Okay, so what, in your opinion, is the best way of challenging the audience, but challenging them in a moral way? So not by invoking disgust and revulsion, or repulsion, but by bringing them to a good, by presenting them a good. So do you think that that's possible, and how's it done?
Yeah. Oh, great question. Again, let's go back to the basics of imitation or picturing. What is it exactly that art imitates? Aristotle tells us in the Poetics, it imitates human beings in action, human beings doing things. Now, what do human beings do? Well, I got up this morning, I got dressed, I made a cup of tea. I came into Christendom College. I'm having a wonderful conversation with you. I do lots of things in a given day. But the point of all that activity, here I'm drawing upon Aristotle, the point of all of that activity is a highest and a best good that in English we commonly call happiness. There's a point, in other words, to everything I do, and that is to become happy. So here is one of my most controversial points in my book. Every one of the mimetic arts, every one, including sculpture, including music, ballet, you name it, every one of the mimetic arts are imitating human beings in one way or another, trying to work out their happiness. That is the claim that I would really want the readers of my book, those enjoying this podcast, to chew on. And I want you to go immediately to cases that seem to contradict it, like that still life I was talking about at the beginning, a bowl of fruit and a bottle of wine at a table. How can that imitate human beings in action? There aren't even any human beings in the frame. I beg to differ. It's only human beings who arrange fruit in bowls. It is only human beings who make and bottle wine. It is only human beings who decorate their living spaces. That is a human scene, even when there's no human being in the plane or in the frame. And I would say the same thing about a landscape.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the same thing about a symphony. It's a harder argument to make, though I do my best to make it in my book. So all the arts imitate human beings working out their happiness. That is the moral life. The moral life is not just about rule following. It's not just about, did I lie today? Or did I defraud someone today? Did I break a law today? Yeah, that's part of the moral life too. but the backdrop of the moral life, or change the metaphor, the very soul of the moral life is that pursuit of happiness. So when a writer sits down to write a story, a painter sits down to paint, a composer sits down to compose, they are trying to capture something of the human experience questing for happiness, which means they're trying to capture a moral reality. Mm-hmm. The point of all this is to say that an artist doesn't have to make some kind of special extra artistic move to bring in the moral dimension to a work. All you have to do is attempt to picture the reality of human beings in action, and you're there. So all of those crummy Netflix shows that we were criticizing earlier, they're all imitating human beings in action. They are all, as I also argue in my book, they are all moral arguments. It's another thing I like to say. All mimetic art is trying to persuade the audience of some truth about our quest for happiness. Mm-hmm. The truth might be, if you're the Irish playwright Samuel Beckett, maybe you're trying to convince us that the quest for happiness is really futile. Maybe that's what you want. That's what you want to say. If you're Jane Austen, maybe you want to persuade us that quest for happiness involves, at least for many, a certain kind of marriage. Those are acts of persuasion. They're moral arguments. So morality is there in art, in every work of art. It's not something that you kind of have to attach to it. It's integral to what it is. That's at least the beginning of an answer to your question.
No, I think that's very good. But you now just said mimetic art. So let me ask you that. Is there any art that is not mimetic?
There is. And maybe we should limit this. Is there any of what we typically call the fine arts that are not mimetic? Because certainly useful arts are not mimetic. So, cabinet making, for example, is not mimetic. It's not trying to picture some reality and make it present in a new medium. It's simply a design, can be very beautiful, no denying that. Mm-hmm. It's a design that fundamentally has some use. But if we're talking about fine arts, I said, yes, there can be arts that take sometimes very deliberately a non-memetic approach. So we've all been in modern art galleries where you see the completely black canvas. Is such a thing mimetic? Actually, I think we have to, in that case, it's so confusing. We may have to learn something about the artist's intention in order to know what's really going on. But without knowing anything about that, I would say no, that work is not mimetic. It's not trying to picture a reality, because another aspect of picturing we haven't mentioned yet is that there has to be some sensible connection in the work to the reality being pictured. I have to be able to recognize what is being pictured. If I can't make any active recognition at all, I'm at an utter loss, and I have to do what I just suggested we do. I have to go read about the artist. I have to go buy the brochure from the art gallery to read up on the painting to see what the artist is up to, because I can't read the painting in a mimetic way. And it could well be the artist was trying to subvert the whole mimetic tradition, which we find in a lot of 20th century, 21st century avant-garde art. So that could be operative there. But it is key that if an art is going to be mimetic, we have to be able to make some sensible connection with it. I mean, even in a Cubist painting by Picasso, a Cubist portrait, the subject of the portrait, I mean, is the features are really, let us say, rearranged. But at least in the Cubist portraits I can think of, I can make an identification with a human being. There's something to latch onto. But with a completely black canvas, I'm stymied. I can't read it. And I have to go find a theory in order to try to make sense of it.
Well, one of the other guests on the show, previous guests, David Clayton, he has an example that he also references in his book. And he said he showed his art students, he's an artist himself as well, a picture of a very filigrane medical instrument from the Victorian age, made of metal. And it was clearly handmade and with quite the skill. And he showed them a picture of it. And he asked them, do you think it's beautiful? And the students said, well, what is it? And another student said, well, what is it for? And it's really interesting to see that as a psychological experiment, because you can see that the students intuitively withheld the judgment of beauty before they actually knew enough about it, which is very much to your point. Now, I do want to add something to the, black canvas in the museum, though. You say it's not mimetic art. I would even go so far as to say it is actually not art. And I would go so far as to say, because if I have to read up on the artist, his or her biography, or his or her intentions in making this black canvas, then I'm not looking at art. I'm looking at philosophy, because I'm reading a text, which I'm very happy to do any day of the year, as you probably would agree with. That's not art.
Yes. I like that point. Yeah, you reminded me of Tom Wolfe's argument in The Painted Word, if you know that little book, where modern painting has become theorizing. And it's defective, and it might be decadent, just like the Netflix series we were talking about. I think, too, of a slightly different example I often talk about with my students is a painting by Jackson Pollock from the 1950s. And it's one of his action paintings. So I have colors just sprayed every which way across the canvas.
Right.
The title of the painting, though, is Autumn Rhythm Number 30.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked my students, okay, let me take the little plaque, the title away, and just encounter the work itself. What happens. And I think what happens with anybody is you're stymied. You don't know what to do with it. It may be vaguely interesting to see all those colors just in mad swirls on the canvas. It might provoke your imagination to think, like, how did he do that? Did he just throw the can of paint, or is he just spraying his brush? But that's about the extent of one's interest. There's nothing about human action to contemplate, nothing rich in any way. And I think Pollock cheats a little bit by putting the title underneath it, because, he might have been thinking kind of musically. I'm trying to capture the music, the rhythm of an autumn day, maybe a blustery autumn day. The colors are very earth toned. But you didn't want to do that with a picture of the autumn day. You wanted to do that with the plaque underneath it. And to me, that's artistic failure.
Ultimately with an abstraction. And the abstraction also is then completely and absolutely subjective, which is ironically what many modern artists strive for. And in a certain way, I would say also Pollock strove for. But then also it just loses, to go back to what we previously said, this archetypical recognition, or what you said later, the recognizability. So if I'm just confronted with a bunch of paints worlds on a canvas, well, I'm encountering precisely that, a bunch of art swirls on a canvas. And that's to the extent that I can share with the work of art something that I'm familiar with. So,
right, exactly.
Would you, so I think it's pretty safe to say that you would say that art can lead us to truth. Now, philosophy can also lead us to truth. So what is the particular way of art to lead us to truth? And I'm going to do this tongue in cheek, but which of these ways is better?
Oh, love this question. I'm going to begin by saying what art does is it gives us the perfect sandwich. Now, let me explain. What is the sandwich I'm talking about? Well, think about it. We're embodied beings. We encounter the world through our senses. We encounter the world through our imagination, through our memory, as an animal. Now, that's wonderful. We love our senses. We love making contact with the real world. As we're talking, I'm loving my tea with milk. It's just fabulous. However, there's a drawback to our sensible encounter with the world. It doesn't give us any meaning. It just gives us a physical encounter with the thing, but without intelligibility. Okay, good news is we're rational beings. I have an intellect. And we love our intellects. We love to think. We love to theorize. We love to get lost in the concepts. That's wonderful too. We can't live without it. The problem is that when we're in that heaven of abstractions, we lose contact with the physical world. Mm-hmm. Here's what I think art does and why our taste for it is insatiable, is it brings both those human inclinations together into the perfect sandwich. So art gives us our desire for the sensible, right? So the piece of music, the painting, it's delight to the senses, and it's bringing sensible reality into a new medium, freshening it. We love that. It's particular, like Jane Austen's world. It's a very particular world, and I can feel it, I can touch it, I can smell it, I can taste it. Great. But in the midst of all that, there's intelligibility. There is what Aristotle called a universal, mm-hmm. a truth that is embedded in the sensory experience. That's what art gives us. It hits us exactly right as human beings. We're embodied spirits. We're embodied intellects. Art gives us kind of an experience of an embodied intelligibility. Whereas if I say to you, hey, it's Saturday nights, let's gather at the pub and read Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, right? That's a harder sell. That's a harder sell, because I'm asking you to go up into the heaven of concepts with Kant, and it's very, very fascinating, but very challenging, and we get mentally fatigued very, very quickly. But if on Saturday night I say, let's go to the movies, that's an easier sell. You say, yes. That's like that's a warm bath to us. That's the perfect sandwich, because it gets our rationality and our sensory nature all in one. So that's now, which one is better? Why do we have to choose? That's my question. I don't think we need to choose. I want both in my life. That comes back to my answer to your very first question. I'm happy to have both those experiences in my life together in the same day, because my search for truth can then be pursued with more than one strategy, with more than one of my human powers. And that's a beautiful thing.
Very, very beautiful. Now, luckily, unlike many philosophers of art that just kind of think about these things, you are, and you have described yourself primarily as an artist. So I want to, and I've not read the novel, but I do want to hear something about the novel from you. And also because the book that you wrote, The Good Death of Kate Moncler, has been described as a classic of the 21st century Catholic fiction or Catholic literature. So if you would have to give one reason why that book should be under the Christmas tree for my wife this upcoming Christmas, what would you say?
I would want your wife to hear, first and foremost, it's a delightful page-turning read. I don't think anybody wants to hear about a book first about its themes and how intellectually nourishing it will be. You want to know you're going to be delighted by a work of art. You want to know that she's going to be turning pages, and you might even be nagging her to turn off the light. I want to persuade her it's that kind of book. So that's the first thing I would say. But thank you for mentioning my novel. The Good Death of Kate Moncler was published by Chrism Press in 2023 here in the United States. And it's a book about one very aspect of our cultural moment, and that is the fact that, at least in the broad mainstream culture, we are forgetting culturally what it means to confront death. And so my book is about a woman in her mid-50s. So she's in midlife, maybe a little bit past midlife. She receives a grave diagnosis, and there's no cure. And there's no magic cure at the end of the novel. I'll spoil it for you. In fact, I spoil it in the title. She dies. It's The Good Death of Kate Moncler. The story is about how she faces that death, and she encounters a group of people meeting in a coffee shop who have formed something called the Death Symposium. And they just meet over coffee to talk about their deaths and to say out loud what most people don't want to talk about out loud, and to talk about how do you prepare for this? How do you prepare for your family for this? What are you supposed to do with your stuff? How do you want your funeral to go? They talk about all this out loud. And my protagonist is kind of fascinated and encouraged by that, but it leads her into an adventure she doesn't quite expect. And that's the suspenseful part I'll leave to your wife to read about.
Very good. That is a very good sell. I must admit that's a very good sell. Very good. So I would say now that we come to a close, I would like to ask you something a little bit more on the practical side. And I have asked this question before to philosophers of art and to artists. I mean, they all gave me very different answers. So I'm just intrigued by what you would say. There is obviously, I think, for most people, some kind of desire to, work on their taste in good art, but also just to enjoy better art. And the older you get, I think the more open you are to more challenging forms of art as well. And I mean, I always point that out to my students, everybody grows in their taste, and that is a good thing. It would be a bad thing if your favorite song is still the favorite song that you had when you were at the age of 8. Or at the age of 13, for that matter. And I think most people will agree with that. So my question to you is, if I want to, as an individual, grow in my appreciation of art, what can I do on a very practical level? What can I do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Well, I would go to, if I were starting on such a program or trying to put together such a program, I would make a list of those works that are recognized masterworks in whatever field of art that we're talking about. So let's say we're talking about film. I love film like you do, but I'd be the first to admit I wouldn't call myself a cinephile in the sense that I have seen and thought deeply about at least a great number of the recognized classics in the film world. There's so many films that make pretty much everybody's lists of great film that I just still haven't seen yet. So I would find one of those lists, and I would pretty systematically start watching those films, reading critics on those films, afterward, maybe interviews with the director. As an artist, I would probably go quicker to interviews with the director and with the actors before I would go to film critics, but I would bring them in too. And I would just make a fun kind of self-taught course about it. Something I could do at home. I don't need to sign up for anything. I don't need to spend any real money. I would just kind of self-educate, and you can do that with film. It's easy to do it with literature, poetry, and just immerse yourself in the classics and begin to experience what it means to be in the presence of great art. Because I think we all do. I do what you were describing. We, with a kind of inertia, we plunk down and we think, well, maybe Netflix won't let me down this time. And we try one more time to get to that point of excitement that too often we don't get to, because it's just a decayed work. So we need to take the initiative to self-educate in the way I've been describing.
Very good. Well, those are great closing words, Daniel. Thank you so much for that. I will also send a link in the description of the video to your book, Beauty and Imitation, which came out this year with Word and Fire Press. So I think you gave us more than one great insight into art and beautiful. And I think whoever's interested in reading more about it should definitely take a look at that book. So I'll put that in the description as well, so people can check that out for themselves. Thank you very much for being on the show. I would be delighted to have you back at some point, and maybe for your next book or maybe earlier. And I'm sure that the conversation will continue anyway off screen. So all the best to you, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jan. I enjoyed it very much and would always love to come back. Thank you very much.